Welcome. Welcome to the National Summit on Student and Teacher Resilience and Wellbeing. My name is Bob Williams. I'm the Alaska 2009 Teacher of the Year, and it's a great privilege and honor to also be the President and Acting CEO for the National Network of State Teachers of the Year. First, I want to take a moment to tell you why NSTOY is having this summit and why I am so excited that NSTOY is a part of this conversation. I began my career as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Gambia, West Africa. And when I first started teaching, I struggled. I fumbled and I was overwhelmed. But I learned to show that vulnerability with my colleagues and to collaborate with colleagues that were stronger and better than me. And I learned to build trust with my students, listen to a lot of their feedback, gather their feedback in a lot of different ways, and also instill within my students this sense that we were a learning community, and I really believed that they could be successful and they would be successful. And I became more effective. After being named the Alaska 2009 Teacher of the Year, I learned from the National Network of State Teachers of the Year, this community, this sense in teacher leadership. Once again, I had more opportunities to collaborate with teacher leaders that were stronger and better than me, and to learn from them, and to get better, and to show vulnerability. The reason we are having this National Summit today is because our members, State Teachers of the Year and State Teacher of the Year finalists, and our board members feel that this moment in time is so important, and that fostering student and teacher resilience and well-being is one of the most important things that we can do and focus on at this time. We have unfinished learning. We have unfinished teaching. But we can't forget that we also have unfinished healing. And if we don't focus on that, or if we ignore it, we aren't going to be able to address the unfinished learning and the unfinished teaching. So with everything that's going on in the world today, more than 350 of you have gathered here today, probably for some of the most important work and learning and discussion of anywhere. And that is developing and building student and teacher resilience and well-being for all of our students when they come back to school this fall. So welcome. It's going to be an absolutely exciting day. And I'm proud that NSTOY and you are a part of it. Just a little bit of logistics today. Following the keynote, the opening keynote today, which is going to be absolutely amazing, Dr. Natasha Murray will be your host for the day. She's a member on NSTOY's board of directors, and she is also a 2017 New York State Teacher of the Year finalist. And she is absolutely going to be amazing, and you're going to be in great hands with her as your host throughout the day. So look forward to that. You also might be wondering why hundreds, more than 350 teachers, policymakers, and advocates have registered for this event today and gathered here today. We're here to focus on the social emotional health and well-being of all students, teachers, school leaders, and community members for this crucial and pivotal 2021-2022 school year. We're here to address the importance of student and teacher well-being and resilience during this end part of the COVID-19 pandemic and after the COVID-19 pandemic. We're here to highlight and share actionable and best practices for social and emotional teaching and learning. We believe that teachers can envision and lead changes at local, state, and national levels for more equitable and educational outcomes. This summit, just a few logistics, this summit is organized so that all general sessions, which include keynotes from Sydney Jensen, Josh Parker, and the Education Roundtable, will be featured on the page you're currently on, the landing page. The 4 breakout sessions will occur from 1:45 p.m. to 2:45 p.m. Eastern Time, and will be available by going back to the summit landing page and selecting one. You have 4 great breakout sessions to choose from. Then please meet back here at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for the Education Roundtable and the closing keynote by NSTOY's Vice Chair of Equity, Josh Parker. and Instoy board member. It's going to be an absolutely fantastic day, and thank you for joining us. Please feel free to engage in social media and meet in the chat and react in the chat windows. If you would like to share your experience or what is resonating with you on social media, please use hashtag Instoy 2021 and tag @Instoy on Twitter. All these talks are going to be recorded and available at a later date. If you have a technical issue, please email lauren@instoy.org. And it's just going to be an absolutely fantastic day, and thank you for being with us. It's exciting. Now, it is my distinct honor to introduce our opening keynote speaker for this event, extraordinary teacher leader, Sydney Jensen. Sydney is the 2019 Nebraska Teacher of the Year and a 9th grade English teacher at Lincoln High School. Her 2019 TED Talk, How Can We Support the Emotional Well-Being of Teachers, went viral with over 2.6 million views. As a practicing classroom teacher, Sydney's passion and her work includes advocating for mental health supports for teachers and students. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, it is a distinct honor and pleasure to introduce Sydney Jensen.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Bob. I am so excited to be here with Instoy today and get to share in this learning. I think that one of the most important things that we can do, especially as we start to navigate our way outside of the pandemic, is to think about how we can teach resilience to our students, but how we can also teach that to ourselves moving forward. And that's why I'm so excited to be here to kick things off today. So thank you for that warm welcome. So my name is Sydney Jensen, and I'm the 2019 Nebraska Teacher of the Year. Something that you might notice, however, as I deliver this keynote is that I don't always sound very Nebraskan, and that's because I was not born and raised in Nebraska. I actually grew up in Georgia. I grew up in Eatonton, Georgia. That picture that you're seeing on your screen is a peach stand about a mile up the road from my parents' house. It is famous because it was included in the opening credits of the 1992 hit movie, My Cousin Vinny. And the reason that it's so noteworthy is if you look closely, you'll see that peaches is actually spelled wrong on the side of the stand. So that is sort of our claim to fame. I went to the University of Georgia and worked at a YMCA summer camp in college, and that's how I ended up meeting my husband and living here in Nebraska. I absolutely love working for Lincoln Public Schools, and I also serve as an adjunct professor at Doane University, where I teach a course that I designed on trauma-informed and trauma-responsive teaching. I'm also very lucky to work at Lincoln High. Something that I didn't know about Lincoln, Nebraska before moving here is that Lincoln is actually one of the top 5 cities for refugee resettlement in the United States. And because of that, we have a huge and thriving refugee population at Lincoln High. With our students, over 40 home languages are spoken in our hallways. We also have about a 60% free and reduced lunch rate, which is an indicator of poverty. And so pre-pandemic, at Lincoln High, teachers were very familiar with the trauma that our students experience. And that's what led to my TED Talk in 2019, where I talked about secondary traumatic stress and compassion fatigue, and the weight that puts on teachers every single day, not only in our building, but I think in every building across our country and across the world. And I often think about how that talk would have been different if I had delivered it only a few months later. How much the landscape of teaching and the landscape of our ideas of trauma and of resilience have shifted and changed and grown. I experienced a pregnancy that was fully enveloped in the pandemic. And I think that is something that a lot of teachers experienced, whether that was fear for their own families, fear for themselves, fear for their students. And that has led to a lot of really heavy burdens that we all carry together as a profession. And so first I want to talk a little bit about what trauma is. I think that sometimes we put it in a very neat box where we decide that trauma is really only if something really, really bad happens in one singular incident. And that's not really true. The same way that we like to say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I truly believe that trauma is in the eye of the person experiencing it. And it's less about what happened and more about the reaction to that event. And so we have single incident trauma and complex trauma. I think that the pandemic certainly falls under that umbrella of complex trauma. And those are all really primary traumas. That's when we ourselves experience something that's challenging. That's also, I think, where we would file ACEs, those adverse childhood experiences. If you scan this QR code that you're seeing on the side of your screen here, I've gotten behind in my slides, I apologize, then you can actually take the ACEs quiz yourself and see those different questions that pop up as a result of that. But there's also secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. And these are the traumas that we take on from our students. We inherit them from the stories that we hear, from the families that we build connections with in our building. And there's also transgenerational trauma, things like poverty, cultural trauma, race-based trauma. And all of these work together against the things that we're trying to accomplish in our classrooms and in our schools. One thing that I talk about in my class are several different models to understand how trauma anatomically impacts our students and ourselves. And one of the ways that I describe it is courtesy of Dr. Ham. He has some great information and some wonderful YouTube videos that I think are really helpful for even explaining this to our students and helping them better understand their own brains and what's happening when they slip into that survival brain mode. And so Dr. Ham explains it as learning brain versus survival brain. When we're in learning brain, we are comfortable with ambiguity. We're calm and curious. We're able to have fun, and we're able to take those healthy risks and make mistakes that lead to learning. But when we slip into that survival brain, we are like Sisyphus pushing the ball up the mountain. And as we push that boulder up, it slips back down further and further as we're hyper-focused on threat. We can feel panicky. We slip into that fight, flight, freeze mode. And we're afraid to make those healthy mistakes to learn because we fear that we're going to look stupid. I certainly experienced that in my experience as a student. And I think sometimes I even still experience it now as a teacher. That fear of sort of being found out, that I don't know everything, because I don't. And so what he says is that learning brain is really like being a baby elephant surrounded by lots of protective mama elephants. Those mama elephants look out for the baby elephant so the baby elephant can play and learn. And that becomes our responsibility in the classroom, is that we are those parent elephants making sure that our baby elephants, our students, are able to thrive and learn. But students who experience trauma have a harder time staying in that learning brain. They slip down the mountain with that boulder that they're carrying. And that sort of is like an invisible backpack that they bring to school with them every day. And we have to recognize those symptoms in our students to be able to help them. And that's a really heavy task that's been placed on us as teachers. And that was all before the pandemic. When COVID hit, our hard work got even harder. Schools were closed at the drop of a hat. With little to no warning, we scrambled to make sure that our students had what they needed to be able to continue learning. We worked to learn new technologies, to figure out a way to stay connected to our students, to maintain their wellness, to maintain their food intake. And that was really hard. We taught via Zoom, either from our classrooms or from our homes. We tried to remain engaging with our students and help them still feel connected, even in such a disconnected world. And then we worried about the safety of returning to school. We looked at those reported cases in the United States. We compared them to other places in the world who were opening up before us. And if you're anything like me, you felt at least a small sense of fear about what was coming next. And then it felt like we'd been turned on. We went from pandemic heroes to feeling like villains, as it seemed like the public had turned on us. And now we're facing this fear of learning loss hitting our students, and the responsibility that's being placed on teachers to mitigate that and minimize it. And I read this from one of my students in my course that I teach at Doane University. She wrote this in a reflection and gave me permission to share it. When I read it, I thought it really resonated with me and that it was something worth sharing with y'all. She said, in the past year, I heard many teachers say that they were in survival mode. I know that I even said it a few times. It was a tough year for everyone, teachers and students. I wonder how many teachers and students were camping out in our survival brains for the year. When all of society is in a pandemic, is there a safe place? How many of us were in our fight, flight, or freeze response all year long? And that really resonated with me. I think about all of the multiple layers of trauma that teachers are suffering. We've got that primary trauma, the way that the virus, the stress of the election, and the civil unrest of the 2020 and 2021 school year has impacted each of us directly. Even if we ourselves didn't find ourselves sick with COVID or our families, we still lived in that ongoing fear of what if. I know at Lincoln High, we were constantly on the edge of our seats waiting to hear, would we suddenly go back to virtual learning? Would we still be in person the next day? And that had an ongoing complex effect on our teaching staff. And pressure to mitigate the learning loss ahead of the next school year. But we also have that secondary, that vicarious trauma, what we catch from our students and from others, how we're affected by the traumas our students are facing as a result of those same events of the 2020-2021 school year. And there's a big impact to that. This data actually comes from 2008. The research is so far behind on this. I would be really interested to hear how it's shifted over the course of the pandemic. 86% of teachers across early childhood settings reported experiencing some depressive symptoms during the prior week. And 62% of high poverty schools report that it's challenging to retain high quality teachers. And we know that that is a direct impact that we see when teachers are feeling unsupported, burnt out, and weighted down by the stress of trauma. In a conversation that I had with a colleague last week, she said she was teaching summer school, and she said yesterday was a 3-cry day: plan period, lunch, and after school. And I thought to myself, how many of us have experienced that over the course of our careers, but certainly even more so over the course of the past school year. And then I thought about the way that that's perceived in our profession and how that relates to the 9 affects. This is research that is decades old. It was done by Dr. Sylvan S. Tompkins. He identified these 9 affects to explain the expression of emotion in all humans. And so if you look towards the top of that scale, we see the positive affects: enjoyment, joy, interest, and excitement. Then we have neutral affects: surprise and startle. And then negative affects: shame, humiliation, distress, anguish, disgust, fear and terror, anger and rage. And that last one, dismell, which he used that word to describe that turning your nose up sort of affect. And he said surprise and startle are neutral because we never live there. We only visit there for just a second. We're surprised for just a moment, and then we either jump into one of those positive affects or one of those negatives. But with this emotional blueprint, the thing that he found is that we feel our best when we're able to maximize our positive affect, minimize our negative affect, but express all of them and express all of them freely. So I think that number 4, anything that fosters these 3 goals makes us feel our best, whereas any interference with any one or more of these goals makes us feel worse, is the one that's really important as we think about resilience. When we feel our best, we're able to express all of those emotions. And sometimes that hasn't really been celebrated in the teaching profession. I think about this term toxic positivity. While cultivating a positive mindset is a powerful coping mechanism, toxic positivity stems from the idea that the best or only way to cope with a bad situation is to put a positive spin on it and not dwell on the negative. And it results from our tendency to undervalue negative emotional experiences and overvalue positive ones. And as we move forward into our classrooms, I want to encourage us to embrace those negative emotional experiences as well, because they have value. And the more we try and suppress the feelings that we've had over the past year, or the past several years, the more that we're limiting ourselves to be able to be vulnerable with our students and model that healthy response to our kids. And so as teachers, even though we may not know who our students who have experienced trauma are, we still have that important role to play in providing stability and a safe space for them and connecting them to caring adults. And we do that in a lot of different ways, and I hope that I'll touch on some of them today. We adapt curricula, behavioral interventions, and student self-regulation strategies to better meet the educational needs of students who have experienced trauma. And we have to be able to do that for ourselves all at the same time, which is what makes this work so hard. And so a thing that I like to remind myself of, even on my hardest days when I've spilt my coffee on myself on the way to work that morning, is that in every encounter, we either give life or we drain it. There is no neutral exchange. And I try and rely on these 5 principles of trauma-informed care. We have to provide safety for our students, both physical and emotional, provide choice and collaboration, build trust, and then seek empowerment for our students in order to be trauma responsive in our classrooms. And a lot of that, almost all of it, relies on relationships. We say all the time, we have to Maslow before we can bloom. So when we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have to meet those physiological needs, provide safety, make students feel loved and like they belong, which we know is different from inclusion. Belonging says, I have a space for you, not just that you're on my roster, but I've made space for you in my classroom. Esteem, making students feel like they are capable of learning and achieving. And then self-actualization, which is where that learning really lives and takes place. And so I'm going to provide a few strategies that I hope are going to be useful that you can turn around and use in your classroom or your work as an administrator or an instructional coach, even on the first day of school. And the biggest one, I think, is using affective statements. Being able to explain to our students how we're feeling in the midst of a tough situation, and modeling that for our students, focusing on behavior, not the worth of the person who is exhibiting the behavior. And I want to use an example that comes from my own classroom. When I first started teaching, and admittedly for several years as a teacher, I found myself responding to certain students differently. I picture that I have 2 students in my class, and one of them is always on task, always doing what I want them to, engaged in the learning, and that student has their head down. And the student right next to them is a student who is frequently off task. I'm often giving them redirects. They're infrequently engaged, if ever, and they also have their head down. What I noticed about myself was that I went to the student who was frequently off task, and I did the thing where I would tap on their desk and say, hey, pick your head up. And then I would go to the student who always did their assignments, was always paying attention. And I would lean down next to that student, get really down on their level, and quietly say to them, are you feeling okay? Do you need to go to the nurse? Is everything all right? And when I realized what I was doing, I had this sort of epiphany, this sort of aha moment, and I shifted my behavior and started saying, hey, are you feeling okay? To every student, regardless of their level of engagement or compliance in the classroom. I noticed a huge shift in the response that I was receiving from students. And I started to learn more deeply about their experiences outside of my classroom that led to them having their heads down in class. And so I saw a huge benefit from that. Another one is predictability. Our students love routine, even if they can't verbalize that. I love routine as well. And maintaining that clear communication is really crucial, especially for our students who have been impacted by trauma. It helps them avoid entering that fight, flight, freeze mentality and response. And so here on this slide, I've got an example of one of my warm-up slides. And the thing that I think is sort of the secret sauce to this is that success looks like box on the right-hand side. So often we forget that even our high school students are still kids and they're still learning and growing. And it's hard for us to remember that we have to explain to them the expectations every single minute of every single day if we want them to be able to rise to that occasion. And so including that on slides with each part of our lesson is crucial to helping our students know exactly what to expect from us and how to be successful. It also helps with that sense of safety that's so vital for our students. Students live in fear of being humiliated in front of their peers, especially our students who have experienced or are experiencing emotional abuse, racism, and other traumas, bullying, poverty. Another way we can do that is by avoiding playing the gotcha game with students in class, considering strategies like cold calling, and how we can make them more emotionally safe for our students. Doing things like giving students a heads up when we're going to call on them for a question, or giving them a chance to discuss with a partner before we ask them to share out loud with the whole class. We have to remember that so many of our students have spent a significant amount of time outside of the classroom over this past year. And so welcoming them back into our classroom is going to require that we promote a sense of safety even beyond what we thought was necessary in years before. But it's also good to remind ourselves that the existence of trauma and the experience of trauma does not excuse our students from the rigors of academic press. We show our students that we care about them by believing that they can succeed no matter what their circumstances are. And so if we allow students to not participate and be silent in our classrooms, we're not doing ourselves any favors, and we're not having an equitable classroom for all of our kids. Another one that I think is important is empowerment. As a teacher of students who are not native English speakers, this one becomes really important for me. We have so many students who don't have a strong English vocabulary, and they're afraid to share their learning out loud because they don't want to be publicly shamed for a wrong answer, or they just don't know how to put it into words. And so it's so powerful to give students a sentence frame that can help them put that into words and say, hey, when you respond to this question, you're going to say, my name is blank, and I know blank because in the text it says. And that allows our students to have that vessel, that vehicle, to feel confident sharing their learning with other people and take those healthy risks that lead to learning. And then praise and gratitude. This is one that I think has also made a huge impact in my classroom and in the classrooms of my colleagues at Lincoln High. When students have experienced trauma, they often have a compromised capacity to self-acknowledge their feelings and their efforts. Sometimes we have students who don't see themselves as learners. And that's why we have to create islands of competence. If you're a basketball fan, you probably recognize that picture on your screen. That is Coach Mike Krzyzewski of Duke University, Coach K. One time I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about Coach K, and they said that in an interview, one of the things that he was asked was like, how do you keep the stamina? How do you have such a winning record with your basketball team? And he said, the secret to success is you can never let them lose more than twice in a row. Because when you lose more than twice in a row, you really feel like a loser. And so even if they're losing multiple games, he had to find ways to create wins, even in practice. And I thought, wow, That's something that I need to be thinking about as a teacher. When I have students who are consistently coming up against tasks that they feel like they can achieve, they start to lose that feeling of esteem that they can do it. And so I have to be able to build those islands of competence for our students who are struggling. And one of the ways to do that, I think, is to teach students how to praise one another. This is something that I love to do in my classroom. It's something I picked up from a colleague at Lincoln High, asking students to show gratitude to one another. And we model it ourselves as teachers by saying things like, thank you for working hard today at this really tough task. I'm so proud to be your teacher. But having students turn to their partners and congratulate them on a job well done. Hey, give your partner a high five, a fist bump, shake their hand. Sometimes I ask them to turn to each other, and ninth graders, they kind of say it a little tongue in cheek at first and say, thank you for being my partner. You are so insightful. What's great and what's funny is that even after a week, they start to be really sincere in showing gratitude to their peers. And we also have the responsibility to affirm their identities through our curriculum. Every student should be able to see themselves reflected in the learning that we're putting in front of them. I love the metaphor that it should be like a window and a mirror. When we look out a window, we're able to see into other people's lives and worlds, but we can also often see our own reflections in that mirror or in that window. And so it's also showing us something about ourselves. When our students are able to connect with our curriculum on a deeper level, on a level that relates to their identity, we know that they're going to feel safer in our classrooms. And the last one that I want to share is that we have to have honest reflection and acknowledgement of our own biases. My friend Rodney Robinson, our 2019 National Teacher of the Year, talks about this often when he talks about diversifying our profession. And he talks about how if you look at the numbers of the school to prison pipeline, suspension numbers, etc., educators of color aren't having good experiences at school. They've been singled out for their behavior and for discipline, and that's traumatic. And no one wants to go back to the scene of their trauma. So they don't see that as a viable career for them because from what they've seen, they aren't valued or appreciated. And so something that stands out to me is that as teachers, when we have students who feel discriminated against, it doesn't matter if we meant to. It's those perceived experiences of discrimination that can result in our mental health outcomes, regardless of our intention. And so as we start to wind down today, I want to remind us that we are not immune to the effects of trauma. Our resilient community of educators is vital if we're going to make a way forward that's more equitable, intentional, and sustainable. And that means acknowledging things like secondary traumatic stress and making sure that we're making a pathway forward that's going to lead to healthy outcomes for teachers so that we can stay in the profession and continue to build those strong relationships with our students. And that can be creating safe spaces for teachers to share our stories with one another, faculty appreciation events, maintaining our engagement with our own family and friends, and prioritizing our hobbies and practicing mindfulness and self-care, which I know has become sort of a buzzword. So something that I challenge you to do, and if you scan that QR code on your screen, is to come up with your own working agreements and wellness creed for yourself. Make commitments to yourself, like clocking out at a certain time every day, because work can wait. Resisting the urge to check your email during family time, but also making those commitments to your school and your school community that you know are important. Things like reading or watching something for your own professional growth for 15 minutes a day, or responding to emails within 24 hours when it's not the weekend. And practicing selective vulnerability. So much of what makes teaching hard is that we do it behind closed doors. We convince ourselves that everyone else has it together, everybody else knows what's going on, and we're the only ones who are struggling. And the more that we open the door and peel back the curtain and share the stories of our classrooms with each other and with the world, the more we humanize ourselves and forge those strong relationships. So the 5 stages of grief, I feel like I've really gone through over this past year during the pandemic. This is that Kubler-Ross model: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And posthumously, they actually published a follow-up book where they added a number 6, finding meaning. And so I want you to think about, what do you hope or believe will be the meaning that we find through this experience that we've had over the past year? And I think as we focus on finding meaning, that's where resilience will live. The same way we anchor ourselves in our why as teachers, we have to anchor our future in finding meaning so that we can remain resilient. So growing up in Eatonton, a big thing is planting trees, pine trees, those loblolly pine trees. And now I live in Nebraska, where it's the home of Arbor Day. And so interestingly enough, in both places, there's this saying that the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. But the second best time to plant a tree is today. And I think that that relates to a lot of things in our lives that are really hard. You know, I wish I would have started eating healthier 10 years ago, or exercising better 10 years ago, or prioritizing my own wellness and self-care. But the second best time to start is today. And that's my challenge for you as you engage in this conference, is to think about how you can plant a tree today that's going to pay off in August, that's going to pay off when you get to year 30 of your career, and that's going to pay off as you continue to be a teacher leader. So thank you so much for being here. I'm always so proud to be a member of INSTOY, and it's been an honor and a privilege to be able to share here with INSTOY this morning. If you'd like to connect and follow up, you can find me on Twitter at Sydney C. Jensen, but my email address and website are also available there as well. Shout out to Bob Williams for such a great introduction, and for being such a wonderful leader of INSTOY. And now I will kick it over to our MC for today.
Sydney, that was absolutely perfect, and I just want to thank you so much. I have scribbled down, I think 15 different things to work on, or this was masterful, and I have down just this idea of like affective statements. I think if we have more teachers putting effective statements in to help support students, and the commitment to self, commitment to students. I found sometimes I would put a sticky note on my whiteboard just saying like 7 p.m., meaning no matter what, I was walking out of the school at 7 p.m. and I wasn't going to be late. And I think as we think of how to bring joy back and this student resilience to our students, you have so many great tips here and so many masterful things. Thank you very, very much. This really strongly resonated with everyone here today, and it's just been a joy to have you here. So thank you.
Thank you.
And absolutely. And now we are going to turn over to our masterful host for the day, Dr. Natasha Murray.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It is so good to see you all today. Thank you so much, Sydney, and thank you, Bob. I'd like to take a few seconds just to reintroduce myself. My name is Natasha Murray, and I am a 2017 finalist for New York State Teacher of the Year. I am an INSTOY board member, and I will be your host for the remainder of the summit today. Now today, well, right now, actually, we're going to transition into the most difficult part of the summit, because you are going to have to choose just one of our breakout sessions, one of our 4 absolutely amazing breakout sessions. But as I'm sure Bob mentioned earlier, Later on after the summit, you'll be able to view all of the breakout sessions because we'll have recordings of all of those. But after our breakout session, you're going to have a short break, and then you will come back here at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. After that, we will have a roundtable discussion, and then we will transition into our closing keynote with Mr. Josh Parker. But for now, I would like for you to go back to your landing page, choose a breakout session. After the breakout session, you'll have a short break, and we will see you back here at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. See you then.